I think part of the answer lies in the past, not just the near past, the distant past. As a historian of religion and mythology, I'm going to take us all the way back to the 11th and 12th centuries and the birth of romantic love among the troubadour poets. There is a poet named Uchtdescensirc, one of the great troubadour poets. A single line of his poetry is going to tell you everything you need to know about the intent and purpose of romantic love. He said, "To be in love is to stretch toward heaven through a woman." Now there you have it, the three components: to be in love, heaven, and the role of the woman. Romantic love was not, is not, and never can be about actual human relationships. This is the devastating truth that people do not recognize. Romantic love is a very particular psychological construct that came about as a result of the oppression of women and the feminine principle for 1,000, 2,000 years. The troubadour movement is the first historical redressing of that oppression. The feminine principle must be elevated. We are now going to see the feminine principle coming in as a symbolic way of reaching toward wholeness, i.e., heaven. So the male troubadour poets, being more sensitized to that lack, what's missing in their interior life, realize that they must pay homage to the feminine principle. And as poets, they do so by creating my lady, my lord. They call my lady my lord in their French vernacular. Put her on a pedestal and feel that sense of being enriched, inflamed by the passions of the lower sexual energies of love to reach into the spiritual heights. What they are reaching for is not a real relationship with another human being. And this is attested to by the poems that we have of the women to whom the troubadours were writing. It was never about a real relationship. The woman had to remain on a pedestal in an idealized form in order for the sense of wholeness to begin to operate in the psyche. So romantic love, as envisioned by the troubadours and systematized by the laws of courtly love, comes down to us through the centuries, and in fact is given further mystique and power during the Victorian era. And frankly, that is what we are still living or wrestling with in the 21st century. Romantic love, again, is a psychological construct that's about wholeness and the search for spirituality. It is not about relating to an actual human being. This is why, again and again, we fall in love according to the romantic pattern that we've inherited and that has been celebrated in song, story, poem, and film, and we find inevitably that it doesn't work. It doesn't work in terms of marriage, it doesn't work in terms of longevity, and it doesn't work in terms of our own inner psychological need for growth and development. Let me give you sort of an analogy here. We use the expression falling in love, which is so appropriate because it really is like that. You're walking along, and for sake of the analogy here, we'll stick with the male troubadour poet. He's walking along and his eyes catch sight of a beautiful woman. And in that moment, in that glance, something ignites in his heart through his observation of this woman who seems to him to carry all the qualities of perfection. He falls in love. This really is falling into the chemical river of hormonal turbulence, if you'll pardon me, okay? Now, the thing is, it feels great. It is such a rush, and the aroma that is sent up by the spume and the foam, it is heavenly. That's why people love to fall in love. The heavenly perfume of falling in love. So there you are being carried along on this river of love. Inevitably, you hit the falls, you hit the rocks, and you are unceremoniously tossed out on the bank. And then you think something's wrong. It wasn't the right person, or he or she is the one who lost that beautiful perfume that we had. And you find that you are disillusioned, deflated, bruised, and wounded. But it's never the fault of the other person, nor should you be blamed. It was never meant to last. It can't last. It was based, number one, on that hormonal upsurge of chemical attraction, and number two, into this mythic notion of a romance that was not meant to guide you step by step through relationship with an actual human being, but was meant to ignite your spiritual sensibilities, right? By pulling on the energies of the sexual chakra and igniting the heart and lifting you into the spiritual realms. This is the purpose of romantic love. So that's why romantic love is good. We want to be alive to all of the energies that are innate to human beings. What's bad is when you don't recognize the function of romantic love and you mistake that initial rush and energy as this is how it should be all the time. This means that I've chosen the right person. It means neither of those things. There's a wonderful German poet by the name of Rainer Maria Rilke who starts one of his poems, "Just as the winged energy of delight carried you over many chasms early on, now being carried along is not enough." And this is where we are with romantic love, being carried along in that turbulent, delightful river of love is not enough. You have to learn to swim. You have to learn to navigate. You have to understand what it's going to take to move across the shore and find a true sense of love between whole individuals. I want to help people understand this. I want to help take apart that myth of romantic love to show what it is and what isn't, and how you can move with it towards the other shore. The right form of love assumes a wrong form of love. For our purposes, let's say the wrong form of love is that love which mistakes its purpose and mistakes its object. By mistaking its object, I mean that you have fallen in love with someone and you think you know that someone. But in the initial stages, you really don't. In the initial stages, what you're caught up in is your projection onto that person. That person is carrying for you those higher realms of hope, expectation, fantasy, the imagination of who you could be, of who you want to become. But that's not who that person really is. You haven't really seen them until you are able to remove your projections, both the good and the shadow, because inevitably that person is also carrying your dark side for you. And that's usually what happens in the second stage, after you've been tossed onto the bank and out of the great stream of love, is that you begin to notice that the other person, in fact, is not as perfect as you thought they were. You begin to notice all sorts of things about them that are very uncomfortable and will probably remind you of past relationships that you've had with significant others, or more likely with family members, because you're always attracting to you those people who are going to push your particular buttons and trigger those particular issues which are still alive in your psyche and which your psyche wants you to heal. So this is the very dangerous stage where you are tempted to simply blame the other person for being the wrong person for you and walk back to the top of the mountain and hope to catch another river so that you can have that joyous experience of tumbling into love and being carried along again. Rather than seeing that all of these people that you've fallen in love with are carrying the next stage of your adventure. If you can have the patience and the courage to sit with it and begin to take back the projections of the shadow and the angel, then and only then do you begin to actually see who the other person is, right? Because you've put the mask on them. You've dressed them in the costumes that they're wearing that make you feel so good being with them. You need to find out who they really are without wearing all of that stuff that you've laid on them. So you have yet this case of unrequited love, where you have fallen in love, but it's not reciprocated by the other individual. That is a case where you do not present the necessary hooks for the other person to hang their romantic projections onto you. And it has, of course, nothing to do with your own qualities. When you have fallen in love and placed these enormous hopes on another human being, and that love is unrequited, it causes a pain that is fiercer than almost any other pain imaginable. Because what has happened is that you have given your trust and your hopes and your dreams into a vessel that was unable to contain it. That vessel lies broken, and your hopes and dreams spill into the ground and are lost to you. That sense of being rejected by the beloved other cuts to the very quick of who we imagine we are. And very often this is the beginning of a decline in faith in everything. It signals your loss of interest in life. Maybe you start to lose your religion over it, your sense of independence, of hope in the future. It's truly a devastating loss and should not be minimized. But a heart broken open is a heart now accessible to you. In the stages where you are broken open is where you can actually learn something about the inner workings of the heart. The Celtic tradition has a wonderful and I think very true and very hopeful image for this. They say that when we are born, we all come into this world with 3 cauldrons. The first cauldron is in the belly and is the cauldron of the fire of life itself. And in anyone who is alive, that cauldron is upright. And as long as you are alive, it burns. The second cauldron is the cauldron of the heart. But in each of us, it is tipped like this, sideways, so it cannot hold anything. And of course, the great desire is to be able to have that cauldron of the heart upright, so that it too can hold a flame of love. There are 2 things, say the wise man, that will tip the cauldron of the heart upright. One of them is great joy, and the other is great sorrow. Now this, I love this, because it suggests that whether your love is requited or unrequited, just being able to be in the presence of love itself is the opportunity you are looking for. If you fall in love and it's reciprocated, you can turn the cauldron and hold the love energies and learn what you need to learn. If it is unrequited, it still tips the cauldron upright. Now you are holding the cauldron of grief, but it too will burn away the dross and show you the true gold that is the idea of love. So do not despair if your love is unrequited. Move into the pain, hold the grief, and allow it to do its work inside of you. You will find still what you are looking for. Now, I should say, to finish the Celtic story, the third cauldron is in all of us turned upside down at the top chakra. And of course, say the Celts, that is why you find so few truly wise people, because most cauldrons can hold nothing. You have to live long enough to turn that cauldron to face up, to hold the flame of wisdom. And you need that flame of the heart. You need the cauldron of the heart. So the practice of love, moving through the pain, the dissolution, to finding the way to move into a place of true love, is so necessary and so worth the effort. There are many people falling in love with all sorts of inappropriate objects, and it's unfair to say that the object upon whom you placed your romantic projection has in fact broken your heart. Nobody breaks your heart except you. You break your own heart. And the good news around that is that you have the tools to fix your heart. Now, a heart mended is a heart made whole by the effort of the mending. It's never quite the same as before it was broken. But as a wise person said, and this is a Leonard Cohen quote, the break is where the light shines through. So it's good to have fallen in love and to have had your heart broken, because now the light of love shines through to you, and your inner flame of love and light can be seen in the world. So let's come back to that place where you get your heart broken and your reactions around that. And we'll come back to the phrase falling in love, because in one sense, that's not the right image. When you fall in love, in fact, it's a form of inflation. Your ego is inflated. Your sense of self is inflated. You are, in fact, floating on air. So it's a movement, a psychological movement upwards. You feel as if you could take on anything. When people fall in love, they get the grand ideas. It's as if they can see forever, they could become anything. All is possible. That's an inflation of energy, and it's happened to you, and it feels great because that sense of possibility, you have moved into the sphere of another human being's universe. So in a sense, your psychic energy has just doubled. When your heart is broken or when you fall out of love, we're looking at the other side of that. This is the necessary deflation. The psychological word describes it perfectly. You feel heavy. You feel flat. The world feels flat. In fact, everything is moving down. You're sad. You want to lie down. You spend most of your time lying in bed listening to sad love songs on the radio, right? The deflation of disillusionment is very real. But what's happening is that the energy that had been moving towards the beloved object can't meet and make and mix anymore. That arena is closed off to you. Now what's happening is that you are finding reasons to devalue the object of affection in order to begin to take back the energy you had projected. This is so difficult, but so necessary. Think of it this way. You had lots of treasures in your storehouse, and you carried them all over to somebody else's barn and loaded up their barn. But now they're not your ally anymore. You have to go and drag everything back out of their barn and put it back in your barn. This may literally be happening as you remove all of your clothes from their apartment or whatnot. But take that as a metaphor for what's going on psychologically. You have to retrieve all of your energy from that relationship in order to be restored, or you're going to feel so depleted because you don't have the energy that previously was accessible to you. What usually happens, though, is that in order to make that process bearable, you have to malign and devalue that person. Because otherwise, you want to keep your energy there. You were happy with it being there. But if it can't be there anymore, it must be because they're a terrible person. They didn't deserve you. Their life is too small. It could never contain the magnificence of yourself. Whatever the story is, it's a story. It's a rationalization that you need to have in order to make it worth your while to retrieve all of your energy from that other person. This obviously gets out of hand. You undoubtedly have had friends or family members who have fallen out of love, they're going through a divorce, and suddenly this person who was the dearest thing to them on earth has become second cousin to Satan. And there's nothing but badness in this other human being. We're always stunned. How could this happen? It's a rationalization that your psyche is giving you in order to make it reasonable for you to retract all of those energy gifts that you had given. Now, if you're aware of this, that this is just about rationalizing an activity that's going to be difficult and painful, but that you have to go through, you might be able to do it without claiming that you married into Satan's family by mistake. You might be able to say, wow, it just didn't work out because both of us have issues. Both of us have demonic parts and angelic parts, and we're just separating and retrieving our energy from each other, and to do it more gracefully without having to make the other person bad so that you can feel good about all that work you're going to do. The process of retrieving energy is a very healthy one because you're going to need to retrieve all of that stuff in order to fill up your own tank, right? Because you need to have enough sense of self to go on, but also because in the retrieval itself, you recognize, wow, I hung that projection onto her, but it actually belongs to me. I thought she was the gifted one in music, but really I'm the one that wants to learn how to sing. Why did I bug her about taking voice lessons all those years when I was the one who wanted to do that? These are the insights that you're going to get if you can make that a conscious project rather than an unconscious project. So if you're sitting with someone, if you're the shoulder that they're crying on, and they've just told you that it turns out that Maud, was actually a demon in disguise, don't think that your friend has gone around the bend or is becoming unhinged. Recognize they are in that stage of the process where they must devalue the former love object in order to retrieve their energy. Then you can be very sympathetic with them because you know what they're going through. At some further stage, it may be useful, in case they haven't moved on, to just ask them, what were some of the gifts that you got from that relationship with Maud that you're able to take on now into the next relationship? Because that helps to balance it, to make everything of value. Because no love is without value. Even unrequited love has value. Love is the value. You are never the poorer for having loved, even if you've loved and lost. And that may come as a shocking realization for those who feel so wounded right now that they think, oh my God, if only I could have avoided that. I don't believe that. I think, along with the poet who said it is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Love awakens things in the human being that nothing else can awaken. Risk it. Let's look, though, at the situation where maybe years later, years after the divorce, you are still bad-mouthing your former spouse or your former lover. What does that say? It says there are still energy bundles in that person's barn that you have not retrieved. That's all it says. It means that you're still carrying something and you need to go and find what it is that you've left in that other person's psychic storage and get it back. Because the real gift of relationship is that eventually you can feel nothing but gratitude that you had that intersection with another human being on this planet. So, as a wedding minister, I get asked this question sometimes. Why is staying married such a challenge? Why is marriage such a challenge? It should be the most joyous thing that we do. And here we have to say, marriage is a cultural construct. Marriage is an institution, And until you can recognize what that means, you won't understand what marriage does to individuals. So marriage as an institution is a design solution to some interesting social problems. And society has a vested interest in keeping two people in lockstep for a lifetime. Now, if you think about that, in the agrarian or industrial societies, having two people who agreed to be partners, legal domestic partners for the next 30, 40, 50 years, with their offspring all living in the same place, having to work locally, this was so useful for society. So why not get the church on board with this? Let's give a lot of incentives for getting people together and keeping them together so that they support the offspring who will eventually work in the fields or be the knights for the feudal lords or work in the factories for the industrial lords. Everything pushes the individuals into these constructs for purposes that have nothing to do with individuals' happiness. So that is the big picture around this. Marriage is a construct, and it's not about your happiness. Okay, that's number one. Number two, and this is more nuanced, I began to realize after many years of working with the Joseph Campbell material, and of course Joseph Campbell is the one who became famous for understanding the hero journey. His Hero with 1,000 Faces book is the one that undergirds the whole Star Wars movie series, for instance. Joseph Campbell, after a lifetime of reading cultural mythologies, came to the realization that there are 4 specific hero adventures around the globe, throughout all cultures and times. 4. One of those is the sacred marriage. Now, this obviously suggests that there are 3 other hero paths that human beings might be on. And only one of them is about the sacred path of, shall we call it, individuation or self-actualization through relationship. This adds a really interesting wrinkle, particularly when you're thinking of life being an adventure, because it suggests that not everyone who gets married is actually innately, by virtue of their own personal typology, on the heroic path of marriage. Now, when we say heroic path, we mean the ground of your ultimate concern, right? That for which you are willing to sacrifice, the goal for which you will give up everything else. That is the definition of your hero journey, that for which you will sacrifice. Only if you're on the hero path of the sacred marriage will you sacrifice everything for that relationship, because that's your vehicle of individuation. Which means there are a lot of people getting married who are not willing to make the sacrifices, and in fact should not make the sacrifices, because that's not the hero path that they're on. Now this raises all sorts of interesting questions, doesn't it? Because we've constructed a vehicle or a form of marriage which insists that if you don't stick it out till you're dead, you have failed. And yet, we're enlisting people to enter this vehicle, to partake of this institution, who are not typologically suited for that kind of long-term commitment. They're not built for marriage. It doesn't mean they can't have relationship, that they can't fall in love, that they can't have children, but it means the form of marriage as we have instituted in the West, right, in the post-industrial age, is of such a limited, tiny little form that it's going to mangle and constrict the hearts and souls and minds of many of its participants. And this is what I object to very strongly as a minister and as someone ushering people into supposed wedded bliss. And the glorification of romantic love, on the one hand, and the codification and support of marriage, on the other hand, by society, have become commingled into a very unhealthy relationship. As we have already said, romantic love was never meant to be about relationship. Love and marriage do not go together like a horse and carriage. The laws of courtly love are very clear. Romance can only happen outside of marriage. The minute you get married, society and the church put its grip on you, and you are taken away from the potentiality of genuine love, which must live in a place of ultimate freedom. So love and marriage never went together until the last 200 years, when we began to conflate the two. Marriage was a social convenience for the sake of society, families, clans, tribes, feudal caste systems, to keep people, inheritances, progeny in their proper places. It's a social construct for society's reasons only. The conflation of love with marriage is what has stirred up all these problems for contemporary individuals, because we keep expecting that if we step into marriage because of love, we will have garnered ourselves everlasting happiness. But of course it can't work that way, because the vehicle of marriage is not constructed for that end. Nor is romantic love constructed for the purpose of a long marriage. So both of these things are working against individual happiness. Love within marriage can take many forms, but the most enduring form is what the Greeks called storge love, which is a domestic love, which is companionable complementarianess. When two people have figured out how to live side by side and not rub each other the wrong way. It's a comfortable love. It's not eros. Eros, the flame of sexual desire. That, in fact, is a very uncomfortable love to try to keep inside the house of marriage. But there are many forms of marriage. The Greeks had 5 that they were able to articulate and distinguish. We don't have enough forms or names for love. We have one word and we casually throw it all over the place, and I think it's very confusing. There are different forms of love, and we need to address them separately and understand the vehicles, or say the environments, in which they can flourish. So, as Joseph Campbell discovered, there are 4 what he called terminus points for the hero's adventure. In other words, what's the goal? The hero is called forth from ordinary life for what purpose? And again, let me say, he was looking at the masculine hero journeys. So there's another whole story to talk about the feminine hero journeys. But we'll stick with Joseph Campbell because of the incredible research he did and what it suggests. So the sacred marriage is one journey in which the relationship itself, the vessel of that relationship, is what allows each of those individuals to experience kind of a catalyst for their own maturation. Another of the hero journeys is what he called the atonement, and very specifically, atonement with the Father. So this is where the young man recognizes that he is the prince, that his father really is the king, and that he is the next in line, that he must take on the mantle of kingship, of leadership, in order to nurture his people. That hero journey is very often the one that we read in the fairy tales, where he rescues and marries the princess in order to become the king, right? There are so many fairy tales where the young man, who is the changeling, has to win the hand of the princess by defeating the dragon, and then he's offered the crown. So in that sense, you can see right away, the marriage is not the goal. The goal is kingship. He reaches kingship through a woman. So that's that terminus point. The third hero adventure is what Campbell called apotheosis, which is the recognition that I am the Father. I am God. This is the path really of renunciation of the physical or domestic sphere. This is the path of Christ, the path of the monk, the path of the spiritual seeker, where you recognize the godliness in all, and so you don't need to seek it out in a single form as an individual or a task. The fourth hero journey is the one that Campbell called the trickster path. And as some of the examples, he talks about Prometheus and the theft of fire, for instance, Gilgamesh and the finding of the water of life. In more common parlance, this hero journey is every artist, every scientist, every explorer, the one who goes forth to find the new thing to bring back to the community. And we can all see individuals, and certainly in stories of the great artists, the great scientists, where relationships have to be in service to this great calling. And most of those individuals feel that sense of calling very early in their life. They have an understanding, I've got something in me that is driving me, compelling me to create or discover or invent or explore. I must do that. And so when they have loves, those loves must fit into that. So the artist and his muse is a classic example of how that works. Joseph Campbell himself was on that path. And he was married and married a woman, Jean Erdman, who was also on that fourth path. She was a dancer with Martha Graham. She founded her own dance company. They both agreed that they had a love in which they were fervent companions to support each other's dreams and artistic goals. So you don't have to forsake relationship or marriage in order to continue on some of these other hero paths. But you have to understand what path it is that you are on in order to know what sacrifices need to be made and on what altar. And we're not given the tools to recognize how important this level of self-understanding is before you say, I do. So let's talk about marriage for a moment, not as a cultural construct or design problem. Let's talk about marriage as a rite of passage, marriage as ritual. And here again, we are in deep and fairly dark waters because ours is a culture that has lost a lot of its intrinsic and innate wisdom around the role of ritual in communal life. When we had tribal societies or homogeneous communities that shared belief systems, ritual was a normal and ordinary part of daily life. You had your weekly or lunar cycles, you had your solar cycles, everyone knew the same prayers, the same dances, the same songs. Ritual was part of what held you together, gave you a sense of community and meaning and pacing and connection to the cosmos. One of the problems of living in a hyperactive society which does not have a homogeneous culture is that we have lost most of the rituals that were the psychological guideposts to help us move through life. There are very few baptisms, very few rites of passage for entering the world, for being given a name. There are very few rites of passage for young people who move into puberty, into the beginnings of adulthood. Joseph Campbell pointed out how gangs have taken over this terribly important function of initiation into manhood for young men because our society doesn't have the rituals anymore. We've lost the rituals for graceful dying because it's been taken over by the medical establishment, and dying is now prolonged so that the coffers of the medical institutions can be filled with those thousands of dollars in the last 6 months of life. Marriage remains as one of the few rituals acknowledged by our community as being important. And because the marriage ritual is common to most cultures, we're still embracing it. If you think about it, this is so interesting. The marriage ritual is one of the few times in the life of a humble, even a poor individual, where they will get to be the god or goddess for a day, where they will get to be the star and have the accolades of all of their friends and family and community. It's one of the few times that you will be asked to make aesthetic choices about your preferences for things as minute as the font on your wedding invitation, the color of the napkins or the bridesmaids' dresses. The ability to pull up from inside of yourself preferences about what you would like in an ideal scenario. This is incredibly important for the formation of identity. And we are not asked, it is not considered important for us to have the ability to express these deep preferences. And so the wedding has taken on an incredible weight or load of opportunity for self-identification, self-recognition, and the sense of who you are and who you are to become is now tied up with this single ritual we call marriage. I think a lot of people get married because they desperately need the wedding. Not because they understand what's going to be entailed during the long enduring of love, but because they need that ritual. That's their only opportunity to come of age, to enter society, to find their place, to take their platform, their foundation of being somebody. Well, of course, you've weighted it with too much baggage. There need to be alternative rituals of that rite of passage so that you're not forced into marrying simply to have a wedding. In fact, I have a wonderful story of a friend who at age 35 went to a retreat, and her friends gave her the most amazing gift. They gave her a wedding to herself. They had rented a dress, they had got caterers, they did the florist, they had a best man, they had a flower girl. The entire weekend was devoted to Pamela marrying herself in the presence of those she loved most. This event was so profound in her life. It was the pivotal moment. And it allowed her to let go of this real angst that she'd developed around the fact that she hadn't found an appropriate partner. Because what she realized, she was an artist, by the way. That was her real calling. What she realized was she just wanted the celebration. She wanted the ritual. She wanted to be acknowledged as someone of worth, someone worthy of being loved. And her friends had the insight to recognize that that was what she needed. They didn't need to find her a man. They just needed to give her a wedding. Wouldn't that be beautiful if our society could create rituals for those who recognize, hey, I am destined to be a scientist, and I really don't have time in my life for domestic chores and children, but I would like to be acknowledged as a lovable human being. Would you give me a rite of passage, a ritual, similar to a wedding, that it allows me to express myself with that level of acclaim and support? This is a fascinating question, and I haven't actually thought of it that way. That because we lack the other rituals for rites of passage, what if the psyche is actually putting all of its eggs into this one basket? Because we know, we're not going to get a christening, we're not going to get a confirmation, we're not going to get the proper death rites, so we've got to throw all of it into the marriage. This could explain why you have bridezillas, right? Where everything becomes so important that if it's not perfect, you just feel that your world is going to fall apart because you have had to invest too much energy into this one ritual. It might also suggest, although there are other reasons for this, why some people, and historically this has been mostly true for men, feel that the wedding is a form of death. That they go into it with this kind of foreboding that some part of themselves is dying the minute they say I do, which is why, the joke is that men have to be dragged kicking and screaming to the altar. I tend to think, however, it's because the marriage vehicle is too small and they innately recognize that it's too small. And that's why they don't want to get in, because they can feel that parts of them are being cut off. Right? I mean, who would want to get into a bed that's too small? You have your toes lopped off or something? No. You need to recreate the marriage vehicle so that it's large enough to embrace all of who you are now and all of who you imagine you might be. There are a few psychologists who have noted the very slow maturation of individuals in American society, the prolonged childhood, partly as a result of the fact that we had the wealth, that our children didn't need to be sent out into the streets or the fields or the factories to start work at age 7 or 8, which allowed for an extended childhood. The insistence that higher education is now important enough for the kind of workforce that we want, that you have to stay in school, which is another postponing of the rite of passage of coming into adulthood. Graduate school now postpones that even further so that you can be 35 before you even feel like you're a fully functioning adult in our society, which in other times you were already over the hill. But in the 21st century in America, that's kind of just when you're ready to get started because you've finally done all the preliminary stuff to make you an agreeable person to what society says you should be. There are clearly problems with this because your biology is still saying, hey, we're ready to go. We're ready to procreate. We're ready to domesticate. And yet society has made it very, very difficult for people to enter into that relationship responsibly because now we are overwhelmed with college debt or other kinds of psychological issues due to the fact that we weren't primed for a responsible adulthood early enough where we could learn those skills and just do it as a matter of imitation of the mentors around us, which is how young human beings used to learn how to be grown-ups. You went to the factory with daddy. You went into the fields with mom. You went into the craft house with Uncle Jeffrey to learn how to be the blacksmith or the tanner or the illustrator or whatever it was. And we don't have that opportunity now, and so it seems more difficult and far away to become a grown-up. The wedding becomes the line of demarcation, that once you're married, it's expected that you'll, quote, settle down, which means that you'll accept certain levels of responsibility that you were not willing or capable of accepting prior to that.